All right, did WWE just give us another hint as to what is about to go down with the Bloodline and the future of the stable itself? I think they just dropped one that I had not been able to figure out previously. But now I think we're starting to see what is about to unfold here with The Rock, Roman Reigns, and the Bloodline. For the longest time, I've said this in previous videos, the one person I've really been trying to look back at and go through all the different visuals, all of the segments, everything to try to figure out what is this guy up to. And that one person was Solo Sikoa. I was trying to really see, okay, Solo's got to be up to something. But he's got the very stoic face. He doesn't really have a lot of emotion. So it's hard to really get a read on Solo, right? But on Raw this week in Brooklyn, I think we started to see what is about to happen with Solo Sikoa. And I'm going to give you some visual reasons why and give you all the stuff you need to see here that really drives it home and tells you maybe what Solo Sikoa is about to do. So let's go back a little ways, all right? Let's go back to one of the early segments with The Rock and the Bloodline. Now, you guys know in previous videos, if you haven't watched the channel, hit the subscribe button. We've probably got dozens of videos now on this entire saga. Everything since The Rock came back. We've kind of looked at all the tiny details and everything as to what's going on with this power play between both The Rock and Roman Reigns. So, if you go back to one of the early segments, right, this was kind of the one where we started to point out, hey, the Bloodline is all sort of to themselves, right? They're all kind of one little unit, and you've got The Rock standing off to the side. We'll see that a little bit better here in just a second. But the point is, you've got the entire group. Roman Reigns, Paul Heyman, Jimmy Uso, Solo Sikoa. They're all in that little specific area, right? So this is when we talked about how, maybe Rock was going to turn on Reigns and all this other stuff. This is one of the first videos we did. And so, again, just look at this as you see it now, and then we're going to go to the next part of this. So this is another visual that gives it even better, right? You see The Rock talking, and you see the entire Bloodline all grouped together in one little space. Nice, right? They're a group. They should be in one little space. No problem with that. All right, let's go to the next one. Now, this is the one I really want you to look at here because you've got, and I know this one isn't as clear. I had to capture this one from the other video that we did previously. But you've got The Rock, as we've said. Feels like there's a disconnect between The Rock and the Bloodline, right? Especially Roman Reigns, maybe. Although that's strengthened a little bit on this edition of Raw, and we'll get to that in a second. But you have The Rock kind of standing off by himself, and once again, Paul Heyman, Jimmy Uso, Solo Sikoa, Roman Reigns, all in the same little group. There is a clear distance between The Rock and everyone else. We can't argue that. But what we saw on Raw was a departure from the previous three visuals that I just showed you, because those have been the theme all along. You've had the connected Bloodline, the ones who have been there together, all kind of hovering around each other here, and you've kind of had The Rock sort of as the man off to the side. Other times, they've gotten a little bit closer, and maybe we're reading too much into it, right? But just take a quick look at what you see here, and now take a look at what you see here. Because now it looks a little bit different. There is someone who is starting to make his way closer and closer to The Rock. There's Roman Reigns, there's Jimmy Uso, there's Paul Heyman. In that same little, kind of shape here, right? You got a little triangle with those three guys. Like they're all in that same little area like they've always been. But there is someone in this picture that is seemingly much closer to The Rock now. You still have The Rock in the same spot. So again, look at the difference. This one and this one. The Rock's in the same spot. He's to the far left, kind of off by himself, space with Roman Reigns and the rest of the Bloodline. But there's one guy in this photo that has made his way much closer to The Rock than he's ever been. And that is Solo Sikoa. So, I am intrigued. Is there a reason for that? Because this is much different than what we've seen previously. Now, I'm sure I could go through all 20-something segments that have happened with this group, and maybe there are other instances where the Solo's been a little bit closer to The Rock. Perhaps. But hey, we got less than a week to go to WrestleMania, and we're trying to find all of these little seeds they may be planting to tell us something about the Bloodline's future And if The Rock is going to turn on Roman Reigns, what is that going to look like? I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a second. But again, this is a visual here, and WWE also had a couple different shots on this edition of Raw where they included The Rock, Roman Reigns, and Solo. Because, of course, the main event was patterned, to put Solo in that spot, right? He's the one that took on Seth Rollins. And again, we'll kind of discuss what that means shortly. But this is just something that I feel like I can't ignore. Because, as we said, WWE has dropped a lot of these little tiny hints along the way. And they have all kind of connected now to this point to where we're only one episode of SmackDown away from WrestleMania 40. And so I feel like we have to, if we're going to acknowledge the other ones, sorry, Tribal Chief, I'm going to steal your gimmick here. If we're going to acknowledge the other things, we have to acknowledge this one and see that this is a little bit different than anything else we've seen before from Solo Sikoa. And remember, too, The Rock did kind of he singled out Solo, which that's an interesting phrase, but he singled out Solo in that promo that he had a while back, kind of trying to make Solo laugh, talking about him singing the national anthem, all this other stuff with Bloodline rules. So he acknowledged Solo in that regard. Now, there's something else I want to show you here that I think, again, Solo's very stoic. But like you see in this one, The Rock was also very stoic in this promo as Roman Reigns was talking on Raw. The Rock's kind of, he's not really having a lot of emotional response to what's going on. And Solo never does that. But you can kind of see, look, Jimmy's having a good time. Heyman's even got a little smirk on his face. Roman's talking about how easy things are going to be, which we will dive into what that means. But The Rock and Solo have kind of take on the same form now whenever Roman Reigns speaks. And I think that's also an interesting dynamic here that we have to look at. So, are we reading too much into this? Is this maybe just, hey, Solo decided to stand there. Didn't realize what he was doing. He just happened to be standing there. Possible. But there also may be something to it. And that is where we dive into what exactly could happen now coming out of this. So, if we say there is a clear difference in where Solo is standing and all of that, right? Let's say we're going to go with that. Something else happened on this edition of Raw that I think could also play into what is going to eventually happen with the Bloodline. You remember the backstage segment? After all this took place, before the main event, all that's like we're in the middle of the show, backstage segment, Reigns is as confident as ever, and we'll mention why. But Reigns and Heyman decided to leave because that's when they revealed Roman Reigns is going to induct Paul Heyman into the Hall of Fame on Friday, and Reigns is leaving to write his speech, right? So Reigns is happy. He's leaving. Paul Heyman, he sits there and kisses The Rock's hand, calls him the final boss, all this. Like, they're just, these two are over the moon. They're so happy right now because they're so confident in what they're going to be able to do at WrestleMania 40. But they leave. Solo's got a match later on. Bloodline rules, and we know Reigns eventually comes back. I want to make that very clear. But it's at least an interesting thing. What happened in that time if this was nothing more? Maybe it was just a ruse, right? Maybe they all were together after this and we didn't know it. This was all for the camera. They wanted to make people think that Reigns was leaving. That's certainly a possibility. But is there also a possibility that if we think Reigns and Heyman left for a little while to go do this speech or whatever, right? Maybe they're just gone for a little bit. What conversations were had between The Rock and Solo Sikoa? Are they in cahoots now? Are we seeing the turn of the Bloodline where all of a sudden the tribal chief is no longer the tribal chief and the final boss is the one who is about to take over the Bloodline, as we have all possibly seen for quite a while now? Was that little hint there from Solo Sikoa in moving closer and closer to The Rock? Is that now giving us a better idea of what Solo's motivations are and what maybe The Rock and Solo may have in mind versus what Roman Reigns thinks is actually reality? And if you think about this too, who was the first one out in the match to kind of save Solo Sikoa, right? Jimmy came out, we know that. Jimmy and Jay fought off, but The Rock came out after that. Now, ultimately, Reigns would come out, and Reigns would actually be the one that would save The Rock. But Rock was actually the first one there to kind of make the save for Solo in that instance, if you think about it, right? Because he was the first one that came out, after the whole Jimmy thing. So, again, Jimmy kind of fought off, but Solo needed help, and The Rock was there. All right? So, how do we now add this into everything else we've seen? If this is The Rock's plan, if Solo is to turn on Roman Reigns and The Rock ultimately takes claim of the Bloodline, why would The Rock do that? Because Roman Reigns said something that he may regret. What did he say? Reigns said in the promo that this is now going to be the easiest WrestleMania of his life. And he thanked The Rock for that. He thanked his cousin for now making this the easiest WrestleMania of his entire life. So what happens if Roman Reigns loses to Cody Rhodes on night 2 after what we expect is a win for The Rock and Roman Reigns on night 1 to give us Bloodline rules for night 2, because we just saw what happens when you have a Bloodline rules match. Chaos. Pure and utter chaos. If Roman Reigns still loses with Bloodline rules, Cody finishes the story on night 2 of WrestleMania 40, The Rock will have done what? He will have stacked every possible thing that he could in Roman Reigns' favor. And yet, Roman couldn't get the job done. Rock did it for who? He did it for the family. All of these guys have said the same thing. The Rock is doing it for the family. That's what family does. Even if he thinks that, okay, maybe he has issues with Roman Reigns, he's doing what family does. He's giving Roman every single opportunity to succeed. It's like the father and the son, right? Where he's trying to lead him to the path. But it's like the saying, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And so The Rock's trying to lead Roman Reigns in that path to make sure he's in a position where he can finish the job. But if he doesn't, and The Rock has come back and done all of this for him, and yet he still cannot do it, then what? Rock can go back and say, yeah, I did it for the family, yet he couldn't hold up his end of the deal. And Reigns himself has sort of talked about leading by example. Rock can turn that on him now and say, you didn't lead by example. You lost to Cody Rhodes, the person who The Rock basically hates more than anyone right now, right? The Rock and Cody hate each other. And if Reigns loses after potentially The Rock pins Cody on night 1, and all Reigns has to do is pin Cody on night 2, and the Bloodline will have achieved everything they wanted to achieve. But if it's Roman Reigns' fault that they don't, that gives The Rock every single reason he needs to take over the Bloodline, pull Solo even further towards him, and become the ultimate tribal chief, even as the final boss. And I think you have a lot to work with there if that's the case, because The Rock can always say, well, he knew Reigns couldn't do it without him. And yet, even with him, Reigns couldn't do it. And that gives you even more reason to, again, have The Rock turn the Bloodline on Roman Reigns. And what else does that do? You can carry this all the way to WrestleMania 41, like we talked about previously. But it also gives you those matches along the way. Whenever Roman Reigns makes his return, and Roman said he was leaving, right? Remember, that's a little story nugget they've added in here just recently, in the past day or whatever, is that Roman said if he's leaving if he doesn't win. So Roman steps away, goes on a hiatus here. And that builds us towards Cody versus The Rock at SummerSlam, which is still my thought is where they're headed with this. Reigns makes this comeback. Now, you have a couple choices there, right? Reigns can come back. You feed the story to that point until ultimately it's revealed, and The Rock is basically just running down Roman Reigns, knowing he's gone. Like, he's left. But maybe it's Roman who comes back and costs The Rock against Cody. Maybe that's something that happens. Boy, what a thinking, what a visual that would be, right? But that also gives you matches now all the way to WrestleMania 41. Roman Reigns against Jimmy. Of course, you could still have if Jimmy's there and then in a part of this whole story. Roman Reigns versus Solo, the one we've all known we're going to get to at some point. You can do Roman and Solo. And then, of course, you can do Roman trying to conquer The Rock next year, WrestleMania 41. Reigns in the process can become a huge babyface. The people can cheer him. They're still going to cheer The Rock. We know that. There's no way of fighting it. This is the best version of The Rock I think we've ever seen. There's no way of fighting that. But you're going to have people cheering The Rock. Or people are going to be cheering. They're going to be cheering The Rock. They're going to be cheering Roman Reigns too, if the story plays out the way that we think it can. So, Reigns, The Rock, it's all there. And now, I think when you look at the Solo aspect of this, think about how many great things they have to work with story-wise if this is the route they're going. The Rock turns the Bloodline on Roman Reigns, and maybe Solo is the one that we're starting to see. Could Solo, really play into this and be an even bigger factor? I mean, again, I think I've kind of seen all I need to see in that there is a clear contrast between this, and I think that means that we are going to see a situation where Solo Sikoa starting to maybe listen to The Rock a little bit more than anyone else. And that's not going to be something that the tribal chief likes when he finds it out. So there you go. There are my thoughts on everything that took place between The Rock, Roman Reigns, and the Bloodline on this edition of Raw. Yeah, it included a beatdown of Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins, which, boy, again, that gives The Rock even more reason to say, I beat these guys down, I whipped them with a belt, and then we whipped them on night one, and Roman still couldn't get the job done? Yikes for the tribal chief. So there are my thoughts on what we saw on Raw. Have a lot more stuff coming this week on the road to WrestleMania 40. As I said, going to be previewing all the big matches. We'll have some other stuff as well. A lot of big news week too. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about there. I know the CM Punk stuff's out there, some other things. So hit that subscribe button. Appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think. Is Solo about to join forces with The Rock? And is The Rock about to turn the bloodline on Roman Reigns?